Good evening, everyone. I'm Leban. Welcome to the talk show. You know the old joke about the Jewish guy who was stranded by himself on a desert island? Over the years, he built himself a whole city. He had a house, an office, a gym, and 2 synagogues. When he was rescued, he was asked, "Why do you need 2 synagogues?" "This one I belong to," he said, "and that one I wouldn't step foot in it." Thank God we're not stranded by ourselves on a deserted island. We're part of a wonderful community, even though sometimes we may have a hard time getting along. That's what Clean Speech Colorado is all about, keeping our beautiful community together through the art of Jewish mindful speech. Clean Speech Colorado is a community-wide education and awareness campaign to unite us in the practice of Jewish mindful speech to build a more positive, respectful, and peaceful world. Before I welcome our fantastic co-host and special guest of tonight's show, I need to thank all the amazing members of our community who contributed, who participated, who volunteered, and who came together to be part of this meaningful campaign. You're too many to name, and you know who you are. We all owe you a great debt of gratitude. And thank you for watching the talk show tonight. We have a terrific lineup of talented guests and interesting personalities joining us from all over the world. Tonight, we'll be joined by local clean speech champions Seeb and Harper Wolz. We'll hear a remarkable story by Litvak from LA, and we'll be treated to some clean speech rap by Ari Lesser and slam poetry by Chaya Lester. We'll meet tonight's special guest, Hasidic rapper Nissim Black from Jerusalem, who will be interviewed by our co-host of the talk show, Adrian Gold Davis. And all of this is getting kicked off by our very own Governor of Colorado, Polis, who recently declared the month of November to be Clean Speech Colorado Month. If you haven't already done so, take a moment and sign up to be part of the Clean Speech Colorado campaign right here on cleanspeechcolorado.org. There's no cost to do so, only benefits. When you sign up, you'll be joining thousands of your Colorado neighbors for 30 days of mindful speech with daily lessons and weekly episodes. Without further ado, I want to introduce Governor Polis. Thank you for joining us, Governor.
Welcome to Clean Speech Colorado. I'm Governor Polis, and exactly what we need right now in Colorado, across our country, and frankly, across the world, is this kind of united effort to bridge our gaps, to remain respectful of one another, to remain connected with one another, even when we disagree. In fact, especially when we disagree, and especially during this challenging time. Frankly, I'm inspired by the way people have come together in this pandemic. We all have to continue to come together, not only to stop the spread of COVID-19, but to help heal our society, to help bridge the gap, restore trust in one another and in civil society. This campaign really will help clean up the discussion, the dialogue, the civility around politics and the public process in a thoughtful, bipartisan, all-encompassing way that really reflects our values as a Colorado for all and an America for all. I know together we can halt this pollution of our social environment, and working together with clean speech, we can improve the quality of life and civil society for ourselves and our children. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Governor Polis, for your support for the campaign and for taking time tonight out of your busy schedule. Next up on the show, I'm happy to introduce Ari Lesser. I met Ari last year when he was emceeing the Boulder Jewish Festival. He agreed to produce some clean speech raps for us, the first of which you're going to see now. Enjoy, Ari Lesser.
The political climate's a little bit tense. People are so critical, on the defense. If I try to initiate friendly debate, it degenerates into division and hate. Lately, I see so much angry disunity when I communicate with my community. Since you and me cannot speak with respect, how can we expect to have peace and connect? Not saying that we have to see eye to eye. If you disagree with me, feel free to share why. But when you ridicule me and call me a fool, adding fuel to the fire, it's really not cool. There's rules that we should all learn to obey with the way that we talk and the words we say. Now, I'm not here to preach. I'm as guilty as each and every one of breaching the laws of speech, but I'm teaching myself with this flow as I go. Though I don't know it all, I'm still trying to grow. So let's make amends, work together and cleanse our conversations, and then we can be friends.
Thank you, Ari. Next up on the show, I want to welcome local clean speech hero and good friend of mine, Seeb.
You grew up hearing, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all? I did. As an adult and now parent of two beautiful girls, my wife Abby and I often think about what this really means. I know my parents had the best intentions, and I have questions about what this means for us and our girls. Today, our world is so much different than when my parents were raising us. There are so many stories about the political turmoil that result in tension among peers and colleagues, broken friendships and family members not speaking to one another. There was once a day that over 87% of our country supported a presidential candidate. That was a very different sense of what unity meant. We don't have to agree with everyone to respect them. Just last week, I saw a public service announcement from two gubernatorial candidates in Utah running against each other. They spoke about respect for their parties and, more importantly, respect for each other. Knowing their views and the way they live their lives may not be the same. They're of different parties and know that they need to be civil and that we need to be civil and that words matter. Abby and I are working hard to teach our girls that it's important to treat all people with respect, not treat them differently because they look different, sound different, observe differently, or vote differently. We don't need to agree, and we don't need to be rude. What will I be able to tell my girls and their children about how we acted today? In reviewing Rabbi Telushkin's book, Words That Hurt and Words That Matter, I learned that there's an old teaching that compares the tongue to an arrow. Why not another weapon? A sword, for example, a wise man asks. Because, he is told, if a man unsheaths his sword to kill his friend, and his friend pleads with him and begs for mercy, he may return the sword to its scabbard. But an arrow, once it is shot, cannot be returned, no matter how much one wants to. Let's be careful with those arrows, which are our words. I'm Ian Seeb, and I'm keeping it clean.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Ian. Next up, we have Chaya Lester, a beat poet from Jerusalem. Poetry as an artistic use of words is a perfect way for us all to appreciate and take in the concept of clean speech, using words beautifully, artistically, and peacefully. Thanks for joining us, Chaya.
Imagine there's a quantum calculator that counts each word and weighs each letter to capture the precise price of every word you speak. That's what we call onat devarim, the price tag of wordy things. Its sum is inscrutable and staggering, a fee that far exceeds the toll of sticks and stones on worldly bones. For words break spirit instead of breaking skin. They cut deeper than any dagger can. Just compare the feeble warfare of the ancients with the ballistic missiles of today, and you get a sense of how immense the power of the words we say. They're like F-35s versus kitchen knives. Our words are stealthier than any artillery an army could devise. It may sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really just restating the spiritual truth of things, laid out loud by our sages in the Talmud's ageless pages that read, the tongue is so lethal an instrument, it must be hidden away behind not one but two walls to keep its danger at bay. The first wall is the lips, the second is the teeth. These barricades guard against the immense damage one little tongue can wreak. For when it comes to the matters of the heart, to the spirit, the child's fragile fledgling sense of self, when it comes to these precious intangibles, that's where we see the damage our words can spell. For at the heart of things, at the soul of things, there's more danger in one cut down than any knife could bleed. So before you launch that harmless joke, that undercutting critique, think. Remember the onat devarim, the weighty price tag of wordy things. Remember that unseen calculator. Remember there's a nuclear reactor you house between your teeth. I'm Chaya Lester. I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, Chaya. A few years ago, I met an amazing guy from LA, Sal Litvak. Sal is a filmmaker, and he's a Facebook educator of Talmudic insights. He has 1 million followers without exaggeration. He came to Denver, and he spent a Shabbos with us, and he regaled us with some amazing stories, just like the story you're about to enjoy now.
Back in the 80s, I had a wonderful experience, wonderful opportunity to go to Africa and take a trek, a 5-day trek to the peak of Mount Kenya with my dad and 4 of his colleagues from work. The trip was organized by his boss, a guy named Jonathan. There was my dad, there was a lady whose name I don't recall, and there was a fellow named Carl who was Austrian and had grown up in the mountains, and he was sort of the experienced mountaineer among us. Jonathan hadn't done any mountain climbing, but this was his vision, to take a 5-day trek to the top of Mount Kenya. My dad went along, and I was just so lucky to be the college kid who got to tag along. I was in good shape then. I was on the rowing team and running marathons, so I expected it wouldn't be that big of a challenge. But Mount Kenya is a 17,000-foot peak, so it's something. We had a wonderful experience going up those first few days. But as we got higher and higher, it became more and more difficult. People react to altitude in different ways. And even me, the young, fit guy, excuse me, I was, out of breath, having headaches, having to take a few steps and rest, all that kind of stuff. And so when we got to the 5th and final day, which begins at 3 a.m. for that peak assault, it became clear that not everybody was going to make it. My dad could not do it. The lady who was with us could not do it. Jonathan and I were up for it, albeit in our weakened conditions. But the surprise was that this fellow Carl was not going to be able to do it, though he'd grown up mountaineering in Austria, etc. But it was only going to be Jonathan and me. We got up at 3 a.m. We headed out in the darkness. We crossed this incredible boulder field on a very steep slope. The sun came out just as we finished crossing the boulders. And then I saw why we started in the darkness, because you'd never cross that if you could see it. And then we got to that final ascent, made it to the peak. And actually, I have this image here. So that is myself a number of years ago, and Jonathan, who organized it, and our guide sitting beside us at the top of Mount Kenya. As we started coming down, it's a real experience when you're walking down a mountain, because it's not only easier to walk down than to walk up, but you get more oxygen with every step. So there's a kind of a physical rush as you start coming down. We had arranged to meet at this kind of mountain cabin to rendezvous with the other group that had to go around the peak rather than over it like us. And with every step down toward that rendezvous, Jonathan was ebullient and saying to me, Sal, you don't understand. I've been planning this for 10 years. And with the possible exception of my wedding day and the births of my children, this is the greatest day of my life, except for those days, maybe. And it was a rush, a real high, and that joy was quite infectious. And so with every step, it was just a joy. I was really partaking of Jonathan's joy. We ended up getting to that mountain hut rendezvous a little before the group that went around the peak. And there was a stove there, and we were taking off some of our wet clothes and focusing on getting those dry before we headed down the rest of the mountain. And the group came over, and actually the first one of the group to reach us, even ahead of their guides, was Carl, the Austrian. And so the first hint that I had that the other group had caught us and that Carl was in the room with us is when he said to Jonathan, "So Jonathan, how was it?" Now, the answer I was expecting from Jonathan was amazing, awesome, greatest experience ever. But what Jonathan said was, "Oh, it was very nice. How was your walk, Carl? What did you guys see? You took a different route from us, and I'm quite curious what you experienced this morning." And completely downplayed what he had been telling me was such a literal peak experience in his life, so that Carl would not, be made to feel bad about what he'd missed in making the peak on that final day. I've always been impressed with that kind of refined speech from Jonathan. to tone it down for himself and taking such careful regard of the feelings of another. And I think it's a wonderful lesson for everyone, and certainly one that has had an impact in my life all these years later. This is your pal Sal Litvak signing off. Hope to see you next week.
I hope you enjoy that short clip from a recent video from tonight's special guest, Nissim Black. Nissim Black, hailing from Seattle originally and now from Jerusalem, has gone through a tremendous journey in his own life. And he agreed to be interviewed tonight on the show to share some of the ways in which words deeply affect him and really inform everything that he is artistically and as a Jewish father. He's going to be interviewed by my co-host, Adrian Gold-Davis from Toronto. Adrian is a talented and experienced talk show host who herself is now a Jewish educator. It's really a special treat. And for the next 4 weeks, each one of the episodes is going to feature an interview with Adrian and someone whose experience with words and the power of words is going to shed some insight into this campaign. Thank you very much for joining us, Adrian.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clean Speech Campaign. I'm your host, Adrian Gold-Davis, and I'm so looking forward to exploring these fundamental principles for creating peaceful, respectful relationships. You know, Judaism has an extraordinarily high standard when it comes to speech. Our tradition teaches us that the world was created with speech and that words matter, and that words can both hurt and they can heal. In these divisive times, it is incumbent on all of us to work on the gift of decent communication. We need to recognize the power that's literally on our tongues. We must be careful of our language, both verbally and body language, so as to not destroy the lives, the feelings, and the dignity of our fellow. And this applies also, no, even especially, with those that we disagree with. You know, there's two Hebrew terms most known around the topic of proper speech. The first is lashon hara, which is literally evil speech, and the term ones devarim, which means hurtful speech. During this campaign, we're focusing on heightening our consciousness around these practices and honing our instincts to shut down conversations that are hurtful and dangerous. You know, there's a well-known saying, sticks and stones might break my bones, but names can never hurt me. But in Jewish thought, nothing could be further from the truth. Every hurtful comment, gesture, or word leaves permanent scars, not only on the heart and the soul of the one who was the recipient of them, but it also damages the person who speaks them. We often aren't aware when we've caused someone deep dismay. Some people just internalize that hurt, especially children, and it can have a lasting impact on their self-concept. But God created a world where it is possible to change our ways, to ask and offer forgiveness, and to press a reset on who we wish to be. You know, today's guest made some enormous changes in his own life. Nissim Black is an American-Israeli rapper and producer from Seattle, Washington. Originally performing under the name D Black, he released 2 albums, The Cause and Effect in 2006 and Aliyah in 2009, and he was featured on other albums as well. And then he retired in 2011 to focus on his conversion to Judaism, but came back in 2012 under his Hebrew name and began writing from a more spiritual standpoint. Nissim and his wife made Aliyah to Israel in 2016 with their 6 children. Please join me in welcoming Nissim Black.
I'm God's man. Yeah, I used to run with BGD. Yeah, I dropped the B and put a O after the G. Yeah, 6 points, still big up King D. In the synagogue, camouflage, but I can't wipe the skin off. I'm proud of it, it's loud a bit, but I'm not trying to crisscross. I done made it this far, hold it all in my heart. I hold my breath and brace myself when they take their socks off. Ain't no monkey business, cause ain't no monkeys in here. I know what you've been thinking, the black Abe Lincoln. Just wanted you to be aware. Signing off, it's Mr. Black, Hitler's worst nightmare, yeah. Yeah, we gon' play it loud until they feel it, yeah. Yeah, we gon' blow the roof up off the building, yeah. Yeah, we gon' play that motherland bounce. Check it out now, motherland bounce. Check it out now, motherland bounce. We baba. Yeah, we gon' play it loud until they feel it, yeah. Yeah, we gon' blow the roof up off the building, yeah. Yeah, we gon' play that motherland bounce. Check it out now, motherland bounce. Check it out now, motherland bounce. We baba.
Okay, Nissim, you gotta let me fangirl for just 1 minute. Of the probably 5 million plays on YouTube, of that, 4,999 are mine and my husband's. That song crushes it. I'm just,
Thank you.
okay, I'll try and calm down. Just give me, hold on. Okay. I am so thrilled that you agreed to do this interview for so many reasons, Nissim, because you are the perfect person to discuss this principle of hurtful words, or what we call onus devarim.
Thank you.
You hit every single mark. So can we get personal?
Thank you. Let's do it.
Okay,
So
let's
happy
do
to
it.
be
Okay.
there. I really appreciate it.
So first of all, that video, the messages in that video are profound on so many levels, and they speak to so many of the issues that people who are converts, who are balchuvas or returnees to a traditional kind of faith, that people who are sort of outside of the mainstream have to endure. And you know, I don't have to tell you that it's forbidden to remind a person of where they've been if where they've been is not something they're proud of anymore. And yet you are able to use it as an instruction, or perhaps not use it, but rather reform it, sublimate it, reshape it, and change it into something that teaches. What are you trying to say?
You know, years ago, when I moved to Eretz Israel, thank God I have the opportunity to live here in Eretz Israel. I was originally, before Beit Shemesh, I was in Jerusalem, and I was meeting with the rabbi to discuss, you know, different school options for my kids. And he wasn't trying to be harsh, we'll say. He was really trying to tell me, you know, out of pure honesty, what I was up against in terms of the school system, specifically the Haredi school system. And he told me there, he said, listen, you got a lot of strikes against you. He said, you're a ger, you're a convert, you're black, you're Jewish, you're a Breslever Chassid. You know, he went on and on and on about you know, these different you know, chesronas, these bad or lackings that I had, that, you know, that I was up against. And, you know, I remember going home, and as I do every day, you know, try to spend some time with Hashem and his this and talk to Hashem alone. I was sitting there and I said, thank you, Hashem, for telling me all of my chesronas, all my bad, you know, traits. What do I got good? And you know what? I didn't hear anything audibly, but you know what spoke to me inside was that you're black, you're a ger, you're Jew. Everything that he said was the reason why I'm able to affect the world in the way that I'm able to. It was the very weaknesses that he pointed on was the very things that are really my strengths. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think, you know, as this song progressed, you know, one of the lines that you and I had mentioned before about the Black Abraham Lincoln, you know, that actually came that was actually an insult to me. I was transferring planes coming from, you know, one place going to another concert. I was leaving maybe Miami. I was going into New York, and then on my way to Jamaica, I was giving a concert in Jamaica. And there was a group of kids, you know, black kids, you know, from the inner city, you know, same type of lifestyle that I grew up in. And I overheard them like laughing. I didn't hear what they're laughing at. And I thought later on they were laughing at me because the way that I was dressed with my lavush and everything else. Right. And one said the black Abraham Lincoln, like, you know, and they thought that was hilarious. So they didn't think that I heard them. So when I got on the plane, I passed them and I heard them start giggling again. And I came back a few rows. I said, the Black Abraham Lincoln, right? And they all was like, oh, you know, so stuck or whatever. You know, so I realized, you know, that I try to take whatever that is as negativity and use it for good. And it turned out to be a great line for a rap song. So.
Nathan, you know what? What you've just said, if that's all we ever heard during this entire campaign of proper speech, of clean speech, to take the negative and use it for the good, but surely there have been times where it felt hurtful to you.
For
You know,
sure.
it's interesting. When you said something that really triggered me, Nissim, you said that the definition that you used, the Hebrew word that you translated as weaknesses,
Hmm.
inherent in that comment is that it's a negative thing.
Right. Right.
It's not a
Absolutely.
negative thing. You had to do the transformation of, I will see that which is, so maybe instead of negative trait, we want to call
Hmm.
it the challenges
The
in
challenges.
society. But help me understand why it would be. And I remember when we moved our children from one school to another, when we became more interested in our Yiddishkeit and our Judaism. And I remember the principal saying to one of my sons, who was at the time 7 years old, and he said to him, um, you know that because of the school you came from and the way you were brought up and who your mom is, that the kids might tease you. He was 7 years old, and you know what he said to the principal? He said, but I thought this school was more religious. Doesn't that mean you have better midot, better character traits? Like, he heard it at
Wow.
7. So what do
Wow.
you do with knowing? What do you do with knowing from a Jewish perspective, as deeply as you've studied, that the
Hmm.
world, and especially the Jewish world, has an obligation to look
Hmm.
at everyone as equal, as created in God's image, and not point out the differences? What do you do
Yeah.
with that emotionally?
You know, like you said, all these things that, mentioning that particular story with that rabbi or with these kids or whatever, it's all hurtful in the beginning. Everything, to say you're Superman and words don't affect me or whatever, you got to be born Israeli 10 times over maybe for that to happen.
So
But but to be honest, words, they do have some damage, and sometimes that could be lifelong damage. I feel like a lot of the fears and different things that I had was from negative speech hearing as growing up as a child. So definitely. So when I look at Klal Yisrael and knowing from a person who came from the outside coming in, right? That's just like your son, there's a certain innocence that to believe that everybody has great midos. The more religious that they are, on the outside, on the chitonius, then for sure on the inside they must be very, very religious people. It's very, very hard to deal with. My children also to have experienced, very, very much so in your face, like being called kushi out of the name and different things like that for other kids. And it's very, very hard to explain to them especially when the kids appear to be so religious that
right.
this is this is just the fact that they don't have good midos. So if they don't have good midos, then what else is there, right? So I think the biggest thing is that it calls for a time of reflection and tshuva, and we have to listen to the tzaddikim and our rabbanim that we have. I think that's one of the biggest things right now. We're very, very far away from who we're supposed to be as a people, and that's okay. But it just takes the work to get there.
Wow. So, when that video, the way you produced that video showed really a melding of where you came from and where you ended up. But what I noticed was that the overlying message was not bad, good, but it was unity. It was
Right.
unifying. Now,
Absolutely.
how do you personally respond to some of the ridiculous things you heard? For example, I have a girlfriend who's a Black Jew, and she says wherever she goes, people automatically assume she converted. And instead of saying hello or, welcoming her, they'll say things like, "Oh, so when did you convert?" As though the
Right.
fact that
Right.
she's Black means she's a Garris, she's a convert, which is also fine. But my husband hears
Right.
it the same way. "Oh, look at you, you're a contractor and your nose is like very sharp and pointy eye." Okay, when did you convert?
Right.
So
Right.
how do you respond? What do you say? And what would you prefer that people say? Would you prefer they say nothing? Would you prefer that their curiosity is expressed in a way that is non-offensive? What would you like in an ideal world if you could use this platform, and this is a platform, to tell
Mhm.
people, don't do this? What would you say?
You know, I think for me, honestly, I really don't think the conversation has to come up. And if it does have to come up, if there's a major curiosity, maybe from somebody's story or somebody's perspective, you know, I feel like you have to give that person the opportunity to stir themselves. You know, I had a conversation with a friend myself, you know, and it's like, you know, when that elephant's in the room and somebody wants to come over and they want to figure out a way to talk to you just like that. And they go, I know I got Black friends also, you know, and just like, who brought up anything about like why somebody starts speaking to you like they're from the streets because they're expecting for you to speak like you're also from the streets to make you feel quote unquote comfortable, right? So all of it is just they have to understand. A person has to understand that is called being prejudiced. That's exactly what it is. That is called prejudging a person before you actually get to know them. Get to know a person first, I think, before any of those questions should come about. You know, like you and I both, we do a good job at sharing and telling our stories for the sake of being able to give people strength and give them physic and give them hope that they can grow. So that's definitely that platform. But I think outside of that, you just want to live a normal life and also want to serve Hashem and live a Jewish life without being asked every 5 seconds, are you a ger? Is your mother Jewish? You know, to people, which according to halacha, it's just a problem altogether to ask a ger if you're a ger.
It is. It absolutely
Yeah.
is. I think that your work in this world, who you are, how you operate through this world, how you respond, how you have reframed and judged favorably. Everything I've asked you, you have framed it to the good. You have found a way
Thank
to
you.
do that. And I personally think that that's at the root, at the essence of using clean speech, is to be able to start from a place of favorable judgment, of judging your fellow in a way that gives them the benefit of the doubt, that takes in the context of where they come from. I give you a blessing, Nissim,
Thank you.
that you have continued strength and the
Amen.
ability to judge favorably the often hurtful words you hear. And I'm going to give you the last word. Here is your opportunity. Talk to the world right now and tell them how painful and devastating onus devorim, hurtful words, lashon hara, evil speech is.
I think if I can address everyone, I would say that honest devarim and hurtful speech not only corrodes the individual and that is saying it, but it sort of lets out just like this coronavirus, it begins to spread and it moves from one place to another. And even if a person is there and they didn't necessarily know that person actually had it and all this other things, these things begin to spread and they cause a corrosion to a person at the core. And it doesn't even matter if the person's Jewish or not Jewish. When a person begins to speak to that, it shows first off, a lack of confidence in oneself. Another thing that it does is that it damages certain other midos. So all the midos of a person, the character traits are interconnected and interwoven. So when a person does honest devarim, that also gives lead to anger, which gives lead to idolatry, which leads to a lack of holiness, which gives lead to a lack of amunah. Ultimately, it becomes something that's very, very dangerous, and it's a corrosion of the heart and the mind. Another thing is, there was a story that was also in I want to say it was inside the Gemara, that there was one of the Tanoim. He goes out and he sees a guy and he says, this guy's ugly. Like who can bear to look like you? This is he goes out and all the guy did was come up and he greeted him very nicely and he told the guy, listen, you're ugly. And he says to him, why don't you go tell the one who made me what an ugly creation that he made? You understand? And he made tshuva, very, very serious tshuva on this, because at that moment he understood that I'm speaking horrible to somebody that Hashem created. And even if a person, you can't stand the person, it's a perfect exercise for a person to do. That moment you're sitting and you're within the proximity of someone that you can't stand or you have a problem with, or whatever the case is, stop for a moment and breathe and look at the person and realize something, that Hashem, God himself, is head over the heels in love with that other person. In love with that. So who are you to have a problem? So I think there's a very, very important message for our generation today.
Oh, Nissim. Oh, this was an honor and a privilege to talk with you.
Thank you, likewise, so much. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it.
May you go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Thank
You too.
you.
Thank you.
And now, back to the studio.
For this second year of Clean Speech Colorado, we did focus groups of kids of a variety of different ages to find out what they needed to speak more mindfully. What they told us was they need tools. Based on what we learned, we created Mr. Wordwise, and he's a toolbox of different helpful tools that they can use at home, on the playground, to improve the way that they speak to one another. So I'm delighted tonight to debut, for the first time, Mr. Wordwise, and then we're going to hear from one of the Wordwise kids, Harper Wolz.
Well, you feel out of control and you're disappointed in the person you're angry at. And it kind of feels bad a little because you're angry at them and you're yelling at them. Your body definitely tenses up and like your eyebrows would like go down or something like this. Like, yeah. And like you would have like fists and you'd be grounded like into the spot you're standing in or sitting in. It's like you're trying to take a deep breath, but you just can't. Well, you can physically hurt them and emotionally hurt them. Like, you could hit them in the face or something. You can like emotionally hurt them, like with saying hurtful words, like you're ugly or something. You can take deep breaths, like you can control your breath, and like you can like breathe in and count to 4 and then breathe out and count to 4. And you can think about what you're gonna say before you say it, and you can still take deep breaths too. My name is Harper, and I'm keeping it clean.
Thanks for joining us tonight for the first episode of The Talk Show. For the next 3 Sundays at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we'll be back with more local heroes, talented artists, and special guests. Today is day 1 of Clean Speech Colorado. If you haven't already done so, sign up here at cleanspeechcolorado.org to receive the daily video lessons. In this first week, you'll hear about the power of speech. We'll review last year's campaign, and we'll introduce this year's campaign focus, Onas Devarim. Onas Devarim is a Hebrew term which refers to problematic verbal mistreatment of another person. It's what separates us from one another, slicing our world in pieces. That's the focus of this year's Clean Speech Colorado campaign. Sign up now to learn more. I'm Rabbi Leban. This is The Talk Show. We'll see you next week.